So my guest for this very first online branch webcast is Elizabeth Talbot. Welcome, Elizabeth. Lizzie, welcome, and it's lovely to have you here. You are the co-founder of Theatrical Intimacy, professor of movement at acclaimed Community College in Texas, and dividing your time between movement and intimacy direction here in the UK and where you are today in the US, because we are straddling time zones. Before we move into the topic of today, which is theatrical intimacy, to give some context, you are a certified stage combat teacher with British Academy of Stage and Screen, equity registered director and choreographer, and part of the Equity Equal Representation for Women campaign. When I discovered you through a Twitter exchange, I was looking into what had been going on in the media and trying to come to terms with what it meant for me as a practitioner. I'm a stage manager. Those of you who are members of the online branch will know me. I'm Caron Lyon, just so that you have the introduction to me. You can find out who I am on PCM Creative on Twitter. We're here today to talk to Lizzie and the wonderful work that she's doing and the awareness that she really wants to bring to an audience within the industry. You're looking to establish a best practice for interdisciplinary work and ultimately a safer working environment for all artists. So tell us a little bit more about yourself that I haven't been able to cover, and also about your organisation, about Theatrical Intimacy.
Absolutely. So Theatrical Intimacy was actually founded quite a few years ago. It was a brainchild of mine that I've had for quite a few years now, but was a little nervous about going public with. I hadn't found any other intimacy directors in the UK that were working in the same kind of sphere as intimacy directors. So I didn't really know if it was something that would catch on or something that people would be interested in. And it really came about when I read the Chicago Profiles Theatre scandal last year, and I thought, no, that actually this must go public. This work must be done. By chance, actually found Tonya Singh, who is leads Intimacy Directors International in the States. And we started having a few conversations, and through that, the momentum whipped up, and I was able to found Theatrical Intimacy and go public with it earlier this year with my co-founder Yaret Dor, who is a movement and also fight choreographer too. And we're going around really leading workshops. We're being called into different types of productions, and our focus is really through education as well as to produce great intimacy on stage.
Because we met as Twitter profiles, so I met you as Theatrical Inti, and you met me as Equity OLB. But I think it's always interesting to look at an organisation's Twitter profile to kind of see what the context is. And the Twitter biog for Theatrical_Inti, creating dynamic, intimate chemistry on stage whilst keeping our performers safe, striving to develop and improve industry standards, #consensual creativity. Let's talk a little bit about what an intimacy director is in the creative process. Tell us about intimacy direction.
So you might call in an intimacy director if you have a fairly heavy sexual scene on stage or on screen, and it might be something that the director is not completely comfortable with doing themselves. They act as a third eye in the room, and we are all mental health first aid trained, so we're there to help and prevent and watch for signs of trauma with actors who may have this in their past. And really our goal is, so we work in various exercises. So one of the exercises that we work is creating instant chemistry. You may not know your actor, and that might not be a particular skill set that you have, especially with a director. The director needs to be aware of where their strengths are and potentially where their limitations are and when they're in over their head. And I think it's a really great option to be able to call in an intimacy director. For example, if you are a director and there is absolutely no requirement that a director needs to be a fully fledged fight director, so you may call in a fight director to help you with certain scenes, in the same way with an intimacy director.
For people who haven't experience the rehearsal process. When a show is formed and when a script has gone out, you will read your script, and if whatever character you are, you will know your lines, and you will spot at some point if there's particular dialogue going on between a couple of actors, and you'll work out what those characters are, and you'll understand who that character is and how they relate to you. And then during the rehearsal process, shows do not get rehearsed from A to B to C to D to E. And I know most of you in the audience are probably aware of this, but I do hope that we can reach wider with our podcasts and with our webcasts. So as different scenes are scheduled, that scene will very intensively be rehearsed over and over and over again. It can get real very fast, and you go over and over and over it. What sort of relationships would a intimacy director pay attention to, and when would an actor look at a script and think, actually here I would like to have a bit of formal guidance? So where would you come into the process?
It isn't that we come in and then work independently of the director's wishes. We really try to coexist with the director and really take some of the burden off of them and help work the scene. So we'll work with the individual actors. And I use something that's called an intimacy scale. So we scale the intimacy, work out exactly sort of where everyone's coming from, so that the actors then have ownership of that intimacy scale and scene, so that they're not sort of diving in. Because that's really where trauma happens, is when, and a lot of the time it's unintentional, where the hand is going in a kiss, you know, where the head is tilting. So it really gets very specific. And we try and really work with the actors and work with the director as this sort of third person in the room. And we also work very closely with stage managers, because the idea is that the intimacy director is not there, you know, throughout the entire process. The production's not paying the intimacy director through, you know, day one of the rehearsal process to opening night. We're coming in, we're giving an evaluation, we're working with the actors and working with, you know, emotional boundaries, and most of all just helping the actor create, you know, amazing, beautiful intimacy on stage.
Yeah. And something that's recreatable as well, because I think that's when you're doing a show night after night after night, you have to keep it fresh, you have to keep it real. Actors who are working at the top of their profession, one of the things they are good at is actually knowing behaviours and knowing people. So actually within the workplace, people are very tuned in to each other. You are constantly working with new people that you've never met, and you get to know each other very quickly. That you know, sort of, it's not bringing an intimacy director in because they think in some way they are not capable of acting. It's like if you bring a choreographer in to a dance, you don't object to having a choreographer in the room.
That's really essentially what this boils down to, is that we spend a lot of our time working with intimacy. You know, that's my specialty. If you need a need of a fight director, then you will bring in a fight director. If you're you know, doing a musical, then quite honestly you'll probably bring in a dance choreographer. So if you are working with high levels of intimacy, then why wouldn't you to produce the best?
This isn't just about sexual encounters as well. I think that's what has interested me as I've researched into sort of the theatrical intimacy sort of sphere. You know, you've got, you know, brothers and sisters and parental conflict and sibling rivalry, you know, divorce, domestic violence, different levels of love at intimacy.
Yes, and so really when we think about intimacy, obviously we naturally gravitate towards sexual intimacy. However, like you've said, there are so many more spectrums of intimacy out there, and I think just to pigeonhole it into sexual intimacy halves our profession, because we not only deal with sexual intimacy, yes, of course, that's, you know, that is a lot of what we do, but for example, I've just worked on The Pillow Man, where there is a relationship between two brothers, and again, there is nothing remotely sexual involved, but you know, there is a kiss on the lips, but that's much more like a saying goodbye as opposed to anything sexual. And there's a clear relationship between those brothers. That's just one example of where it isn't necessarily a sexual type of intimacy that we work with. So to clarify, no matter how many times you perform fight choreography, you don't actually want to kill your partner. This is where it differs from intimacy work, because the more you work with your co-performer on screen or on stage, you are going to build up more feelings and emotions towards that person, because you're being placed in the situation every night, which is fake. However, the emotions are real. And I think that's the distinction that we need to make, is that your emotions are real when you work within intimacy, but the situation is very fake. You're still two people on stage in front of however many people. That's really the important thing. And a lot of this has come through Tonia's method of intimacy. So she works with the pillars of intimacy, and that's what we've adopted as well. We've just found them so helpful in codifying our methodology, and I've been able to give them out as helpful resources to all sorts of people, and that's really sort of bringing it back to the intimacy direction and not needing an intimacy director for absolutely every single minor thing on stage. Is just being able to have these guidelines and say, hey, look, I know you maybe can't afford an intimacy director, but here are some resources for free that we are giving out to help you work through your intimacy.
It now brings us to where we are in the mass media. The awareness of inappropriate behaviours, harassment claims are currently in mainstream, and how the creative process that the entertainment, whether you're film, media, theatre, how those relationships have become twisted, and we haven't spoken out, but lines are being crossed. You must see that sort of thing. So in terms of sort of the intimacy direction, what have you been seeing in the mainstream, and is there anything that we can do with the awareness of what you're doing in terms of intimacy, of how we can help that not cross over into our relationship with the director?
So I think part of that is some of this could have been prevented with an intimacy director. The director as an entity has an incredible position of power, and it's changed a little bit over the years, but it's still essentially you come from that old school director attitude of my way or the highway, you do this or I won't work with you again, or you'll be labeled as difficult, or I'll make sure that this stays between us, or your career is finished. And so I think having that attitude is unacceptable, and it would be unacceptable in any other workplace. And so really the arts should be no different. It is strange that, and I think this is where we see some pushback for the intimacy director, is, oh, we shouldn't need an intimacy director. From what we've seen from the response that other intimacy directors have had, both in the UK and abroad, is that there is a need for this. Yes, some of these situations could definitely have been prevented with an intimacy director, and we see that a lot. The great thing is now is that directors are actually starting to ask for us to come in. Tonia was invited into the Stratford Festival. Alicia Rodis and Claire have just been working at the Yale School of Drama. Alicia has just been invited into the board, into Juilliard in New York. So it's all great things, but the movement is going in the right direction, and it is a movement. And from what we've seen, especially when I've worked with my students, is it is a movement that is appreciated and wanted and needed.
What connections and what feelers have you got out there in terms of talking to equity as an industry and forced to campaign and support you?
Okay, so I've had great support from the Women's Committee at Equity. I really have. They have been phenomenal, and I have been absolutely honoured to work with them. They really been wonderful. They have been so supportive from day one. We're getting a couple of them to come to our workshops in December, and really have felt very, very empowered by them. Obviously, working with the Equity Online branch has been fantastic, because again, this is more coverage to get the word out there that we exist, because again, a lot of people don't know that we exist even intimacy directors themselves don't know that other intimacy directors exist, because we've been working solo for so long that it's actually been really nice to be able to connect.
There has been a chat thread in the online branch, so anyone who is a member of Equity, you can opt into the online branch, whether you are a regional branch member or a variety branch member. You can also be a member of the online branch and take part in that. And we've had a thread running called #MeToo, our industry front and centre, your thoughts. I created this thread to try and trigger some dialogue with members. We're going to move on now to that thread. We had a couple of comments. So I really wanted to find out who you were, Lizzie, and make sure that this dialogue could actually be taken into the online branch. I think this is the important thing about the digital engagement that we're trying to create with the online branch. And we had a chat, and I wanted to share this chat, or some of it, in terms of the notion of intimacy. I think we'd all got caught up in the mainstream hysteria of sexual harassment, you know, the celebrity nature that was kind of just exploding everywhere. So I asked for some thoughts. The thoughts that I received were as follows. Now, I've removed the names. We're just going to take the comments for as they are. One comment, I think that it's directors who need help with this and training, and especially those in drama schools. I don't think that having an intimacy director on a production is a good thing. That's not to downplay the need for this sort of awareness, but to situate it in the right place in the production process. However, I can see a place for this sort of thing in drama schools and for actors' workshops, and as part of a continuing professional development to better inform them in the future. Directors should be part of these workshops as well, and probably ought to be. But having an additional person in the rehearsal room seems wrong to me. There could be an element of risk assessment that this could be useful for in as well. Also, stage managers ought to be involved. What's your response to that?
Okay, so my first response would be that it seems to be that there's two threads here. First thread is that they seem to see value in it as an educational piece through drama schools and as continuing workshops, but don't see it as a necessity in the rehearsal room for productions. So my suggestion or my offering for that would be that this would be a specialist in the room. So just as you would have a dance choreographer or a fight choreographer, this is an intimacy choreographer who this is their job. They work with intimacy at incredibly deep levels, and our goal is education. So why restrict that to just drama school teaching or just actor workshops? This is something that they should experience throughout the process. And again, that is this person's opinion that they don't need a third eye in the room. However, from the very real and needed discussion that we're having outside of this, it would appear that that's not quite accurate and that this is their experience. But I don't think that they can speak for, to be honest, actresses in particular, that this isn't a needed requirement in the rehearsal process. And I would offer that every student and every actor that I have worked with has never had a problem with myself being in the rehearsal room. And in fact, it has only ever produced positive results. I have never had an actor or a director come back afterwards and said, oh, this was a waste of time or this wasn't needed. But that has been my experience.
The thread is going to remain active, and the link to this webcast will be put on the online branch. Only members will be able to go in and read that and continue to participate. Our second response was, how about an eating director to help with which knife and fork to use? I would feel uncomfortable with an intimacy director choreographing an intimate scene. I would rather work it out by talking to whoever else was in the scene along with the director. I can't see how an additional voice would help.
We clearly have an issue with sex and power in our industry opposed to eating implements. So again, I think that this person is probably speaking to their experience and not everyone else's experience in the room. And again, this is a movement specialty. We work with physical, mental, and emotional risk when we work with intimacy. And if you don't need it, then that's wonderful. As I said before, I've not had any complaints for working with actors and actresses.
Some performers may, first time they know they've got an intimacy director present, may feel uncomfortable and need to dialogue about that. So
yes, and we work so closely with the directors and we work closely with the actors. So we are an independent party, but we're still listening. That's our job, is to read the room. Because the problem is that we need to discuss this before this happens, because trauma seems to happen only after the incident, and sometimes it's happened before you know it. So our job is to work through the context of the scene, work through communication. We do so much work with consent, and obviously choreography, and they're the 4 pillars of intimacy. And so we work through those 4 aspects, and that's really how our work unfolds.
Our next one kind of ties the first 2 together. So this response 3 was, I appreciate that it's 3 guys responding here, but I agree with responder 2 and responder 1. Also, to put the cat amongst the pigeons, this isn't just about the predatory, opportunistic nature of some people in positions of power or influence, almost exclusively men, but not limited to men. It's also about those who might seek to use their sexuality as a form of advancement too. So his question was, which of the drivers above created the phenomenon universally referred to as the casting couch?
Okay, so my response to that is, I'm not sure it matters who created the casting couch. I think the point is that is no longer acceptable. And that is not something that we should be striving for, or even really discussing in those terms. What we need to be, this wouldn't be acceptable in any other industry. The casting couch is not acceptable in any other industry. You don't seek advancement through your sexuality, or indeed have people in positions of power manipulating that. My other response to this is that if you take care of the people manipulating their positions of power, then the other issue is a non-issue. Because if you don't have people manipulating their position of power, then people who are trying to use their sexuality to advance their career, it isn't going to happen. But essentially, my answer to that is, I don't think that's the important conversation to have. I think the important conversation to have is, how do we prevent that? How do we move forward? And we're seeing this.
To give a bit of context, which is what I love about the branch, is that people do come in with their comments. There's a group of people that are regular commenters. There's people who just come in and read. And this is what's nice about the branch. If you're a branch member, do go in and check out the thread. But the final one, they've taken a look at the website from the links that were provided.
Always helpful.
There was kind of acknowledgement in this last response of everything that we're talking about here, really. You know, we're emotionally vulnerable, much more nuanced, and it's necessary and can find clear dark guidelines in love and sex scenes. And then there was an interesting point that they made, which was, take, for instance, a prolonged storyline of coercive control within the Archers, which I found quite triggering even as a listener. So those who work within the industry, they're an Archers listener. And there's certain stories, I mean, sort of EastEnders and all these sorts of things. Some of those storylines, which are maintained over time, must be very intense to leave behind when you leave your place of work.
Something else that we work with is also how to leave that at the door, because often when we take people to a very heightened emotional state, we say, oh, congratulations, well done, you've been a fantastic actor, and we then leave them there, which is essentially what happened to the profiles in theatre company in Chicago. They had great acclaim for their portrayal of violence and high intensity sexual characters, but then failed to leave them at the rehearsal room door. And I think we do a lot of work with actually what we call the come down, and being able to separate that from the actors and the characters.
Turning to Q&A, and we do have a couple of questions. But the first question, is this work being done in other countries, and would you ever collaborate?
Yes, so this work is absolutely being done in other countries. There is an international organization called Intimacy Directors International. You can go to their website, and it's founded by 3 amazing women, and that essentially involves Canada and the USA. And also what's amazing about it, Siobhan now has workshops happening in Stockholm, and she has another workshop happening in Germany. And so this work is spreading. It is not isolated to the UK. And in fact, I mean, Tonya Sina has been working with intimacy for over 16 years as a professional, and even more than that, sort of studying and working through this. So the idea of an intimacy director is not a new concept. It has been around a long time, and Theatrical Intimacy is absolutely thrilled to collaborate with Intimacy Directors International. There are also other intimacy groups in the States. There's Theatrical Intimacy Education, and that looks at predominantly working with drama schools and university level. There are so many more than just myself working in isolation, and we love to collaborate. We really do. So we actually have 2 sets of workshops in December. They are on the 16th, and the first one is for performers and the second one is for directors. And so we've just given them a bit of a different take. So the performers one is a little bit more practical. So there's lots of practical exercises, working with really great intimacy work and going through the 4 pillars. And for the directors, we work through the intimacy scale, we work through emotional mapping, and we also work through, again, the 4 pillars of intimacy. So they are on different threads. You can sign up for those on our website, which is www.theatricalIntimacy.com. In final closing is that I know that there has been a lot of press recently about intimacy directors, and I would really say that it's actually a 2-pronged approach. Yes, we really, our foremost issue and idea is safety, absolutely, but our second is also creating great intimacy, and that's really where we stand and where we work from. And we are more than happy to come out and do workshops, for example, potentially individual casts, individual theatrical groups, drama schools. We're currently working to have a workshop with East 15 directors for a Master's Directors program. So we are there and available and more than happy to even have a discussion. If you have an issue or a question, we are non-profit, we don't charge, we make 0 money from this. We are really doing this because we are so passionate about changing the industry and creating great intimacy.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just so delighted that you've had the chance to kind of share the awareness of the organisation.
Thank you so much for having me.